Um, yes, and well, as you've just heard, this session is going to be recorded. We'll get to all of that in a minute. So this is the last of a series of sustainability focused webinars connected to a project that was taking place between Trinity College Dublin and Bangor University for the last several years, 6.5 years almost. This particular one, being the last in the series, is about managing a transdisciplinary research project. And then this project involved 4 or 5 different disciplines and various partners, and also quite a lot of industry and academia links. And so you'll hear from the speakers today about how that was examined, investigated, mapped, and visualized, and it all looks very interesting to me. I'm not an expert in this kind of thing at all, but very interested in the results of it and how I might apply it in the future, in hindsight. So we're going to have various speakers today, including Professor Paul Coughlin from the Business School and Alex Rigby from Bangor University, but I'll get to that in a minute. So whomever is doing this, yes, let's do the virtual etiquette. So the session is being recorded. We had an audio blip about that. Please introduce yourself in the chat if you're not using your actual name. There's a few usernames in there, so we know who you are, and have your camera off and microphone off for the duration of the webinar. Now you can obviously use both at the questions at the end, and if you have any questions along the way, please put them in the chat and we will come to them at the end. So next slide then. Yes, so very briefly a little bit about the Dúr-Uisce project. It was a project focusing on trying to be more energy efficient in water services, so the provision of water, and also the use of water from the point of view of users. Like, so we all use energy connected with water in heating water, particularly for cooking and showering and so on. And lots of energy is used in the supply of water. And so there were various ways of trying to look at that from technology point of view, which is where myself and my colleagues in the engineering school looked at it, various ways of trying to reduce the energy consumption. We also looked at it from perspective of environmental impacts and policies and benchmarking processes and auditing and so on, and life cycle impacts. And in the diagram on the right is the series of circles and so on. We also try to take all of that information as well as things that others were doing and bring it together in a cluster. A cluster which involved lots of industry stakeholder engagement. And so really that part of the kind of dark green circle here is what today's webinar is about, some of the fruits of all of that interdisciplinary collaboration. So the project also, as you can see, is funded by the Interreg Ireland Wells programme. I'll probably somewhere in the slides it might come up that we're having our final event on the 7th of March, but you're also very welcome to attend that in the business school here in Trinity or online. So next slide then. Yes, so some of the speakers and contributors. So a longtime collaborator of mine, Professor Paul Coughlin, who's a professor in operations management in the business school in Trinity, who has various interests, including very interested in transdisciplinary research and collaboration and the whole process behind that. Paul has been, and also again, if I skip over Alex for a minute, but Roberta Bellini is a postdoctoral researcher with working with Paul closely on this whole area of interdisciplinary collaboration and also communicating some of the results. And together they have worked a lot with Alex Rigby, Panos Ristos and Pete Butcher in Bangor University, who are from computer science background, who have tried to create a visualization of the network of stakeholders, which you'll see later on. And so there are over 150 different kind of organizations and links. So I'll let them do the talking about what it's all about. We have a little agenda here. As first, we'll give you an overview about the process of managing this TDR, transdisciplinary research project, our experience, an opportunity for some questions in the chat. We'll look at something called DU-Viz. So DU is the Dúr-Uisce visualization tool, which tries to track the various links. And there'll be time for questions and answers, and then some final remarks. So I think we're going to start off with a poll. I'm going to hand over to Isabel. Isabel is going to do the poll for us.
Hi everyone, I'm Isabel from the Dorishka team at Bangor University. So the poll question we have prepared for you are, have you been involved in a transdisciplinary research project before? And if so, what was the greatest challenge? So you should see the poll now. Okay, yeah, great. I can see people are starting to answer. So I will give you another minute. About half of you have participated, so numbers are still going up. So I will wait a couple of seconds more.
And Isabel, you might keep an eye on the waiting room as well. There are people still arriving.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. 80% have participated. Okay, people are still answering. Okay, I think I will end the poll now. People are not answering anymore, so numbers are stable now. Okay, I end the poll.
Okay.
And I'm going to share the results. Are you taking over, Paul?
Yes.
Okay.
So I see the results. So, okay, let me just, because it's clouding my screen.
I can also read them out. Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to the results. So, colleagues, welcome. My name is Paul Coughlin. I'm in the business school in Trinity, and I've been a member of the Dorishka team from the outset. And I suppose this particular webinar, the last one, but it's also categorically different from many of the others that we have had over the past year or so, in that it's focused on the task of research rather than the substantive output or outcome from the research. And I suppose what prompted us was that research involving multi-stakeholder partnerships is growing and is demanded if we are to address some of the challenges associated with the SDGs. And we saw that our challenge as researchers in this initiative was to ask the question as to how can researchers design and implement a transdisciplinary research initiative and produce a quality research-based green process innovation. And our articulation of this challenge emerged from a reflection on the Dorishka project. The team involved on the research side spans 5 discipline groups. So we have engineering, environmental science, geography, management, and computer science. And we have all of the colleagues there. But we also collaborated actively with water producers and consumers and users from Ireland and Wales, drawn from a variety of sectors, as you can see there. So in that sense, the group of collaborators in this research spanned both academia and industry and crossed national boundaries as well. So we were aware from the outset as researchers that we were inquiring into complex phenomena of societal interest that required new research designs and methods of knowledge production. We were aware also that research associated with green process innovation, which was at the heart of Duarishka, can and needed to engage with society and cross different borders and boundaries, and in particular transcend disciplinary and practice boundaries. And, you know, we were heartened by this kind of research is of increasing relevance to addressing the SDGs. So our specific focus in Duarishka was on green process innovation, where our hope was to mitigate environmental impacts, to enhance the environmental performance, particularly in the water production and distribution area, with commercial consequences, and also to come to understand the complexity of the collaborative process involved in this kind of innovation. And we understood transdisciplinary research. I suppose we were aware of some work done previously in this area. I put a particular reference in there, which comes from the Journal of Product Innovation Management, which was on stakeholder engagement in environmental innovation. And one of the quotes in that said, "Innovation for environmental sustainability requires firms to engage with external stakeholders to access expertise, solve complex problems, and gain social legitimacy." And as we dug into the characteristics of transdisciplinary research, we found that it can vary along 6 key dimensions: the breadth and diversity of interdisciplinarity, the depth of disciplinary integration, the degree and quality of interaction with non-academic participants, the composition of non-academic partnerships themselves, the timing of engagement, and the types of knowledge being emphasized. We also found that in practice, TDR, or transdisciplinary research, would benefit from relating reflexivity to collective processes of problem framing and problem solving. But it wasn't an approach without challenge. The OECD identified that even with optimum project design, conducting TDR means overcoming numerous barriers embedded in most research systems. And so our interest was tweaked from that point of view. So we began to develop our story very much as a live case study of the Duarishka project, and seeing it as an ongoing transdisciplinary collaboration engaged in low carbon and low cost energy recovery systems and techniques, the delivery of those. And separate to the work that was involved in the main project where we were carrying out the innovation, we were interested in accessing and generating real-time and retrospective data from the multiple sources that I showed earlier. That included interviews with the team members, observations at workshops that we organized ourselves around this, exploration of the project documentation, and publications. And separately, we've written about this, highlighting 3 sample green process innovations. In the interests of our time this afternoon, I'll focus just on one of these, and that's the micro hydropower energy recovery. So in approaching the project and looking for data in terms of our engagement in this TDR initiative, we built a matrix. And don't worry about the detail in it. I'll take you through that in just a moment with a real example. And each researcher in the team filled in the entries concerning their work in their particular work packages or their tasks in real time. And then as a group, the researchers explored and discussed with their fellow researchers any actual or potential links between their work packages. And we did that in workshop mode, and it was very creative. And then we visualized, and this will feature particularly in the second part of our discussion, we visualized the emerging engagements. So taking one of the green process innovations that we engaged in, which was focused on developing and demonstrating hydropower energy recovery. A lot of work went in before we went to the first demonstration site, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. That site was at Blackstairs, which is in North County Wexford, and is a community water scheme. And the installation, the photograph is there on the side. The system that went in was taking gravity feed water into the treatment plant, extracting the energy from that, generating electricity, which could save up to 25% of the electricity required to run the treatment plant. And over a year, if running over a full year, could save 16 or so tons of CO2 emissions. Coming out of that, not just was there the installation in the plant, but we also had an outreach program for local primary schools. The engineers, we then took that basic system and redeveloped and deployed it in a separate use context in a National Trust property in beautiful Snowdonia, a 16th century farmhouse owned by National Trust, and it involved diverting a small flow from a local stream or river and using the electricity that was generated to take the historical house off grid. So what did we see as we looked at that as a particular example of the activity that we were engaged in together? Then what kinds of data did we gather? And this is an example of part of the matrix. And what we saw was if you take PAT, pump as turbine, which is a central feature in the energy recovery system, then in the PAT development, there were 3 different phases. And you'll see across the top, there was the laboratory and monitoring phase. The engineers largely did that all on their own. And they generated good, solid engineering theoretical knowledge in doing that. As they moved into the installation phase, then they were getting involved with practice with the operator of the treatment plant or the conservation charity, the government bodies who needed to sign off on it. And so the knowledge that emerged from that was context specific and actionable. Then in the demonstration phase, where we were demonstrating that to a broad sweep of society, the environmental scientists, operations management, science communication disciplines became involved, as did all of the people from practice that you see there, the operator and the charity and so on. And the environmental science engagement was particularly interesting because what that piece of work coming from elsewhere in the project challenged the assumptions that were made about the availability of water for schemes like this, given the ongoing climate change that we're experiencing. With all of that in the bag, so to speak, there was the basis for outreach to the primary schools. And so through deploying the science, communication and engineering disciplines together, we worked with the manager of the water scheme, the community, the teachers and so on, to get context-specific pedagogical knowledge to the school children. And that was a wonderful experience. Now, separately, we also tried to visualize what kinds of interaction were going on as these different discipline groups were working together. And this, don't worry about this particular image, it's a screenshot from something that Alex Rigby will be presenting on in a few moments. But for those of you familiar with social network analysis, then what we have here, it's a little bit like that. The blue rectangle is work package 1. That's the engineers developing the energy recovery system. And the orange square in the middle is the communication and dissemination and networking group. And as you can see, there were lots of interactions between the individuals and between the tasks involved in those 2 work packages, ultimately to deliver on this innovation. And the murmuration, all of these other dots outside in different color schemes as to the degree of their engagement are the practitioners who engaged in different ways and at different times in this initiative. So as we looked at this, we began to think in terms of what's going on here from a knowledge production point of view. And we saw that what was emerging were combinations of mode 1 and mode 2 knowledge. So for some of you will be familiar with this way of characterizing knowledge and knowledge production, but mode 1 essentially produces universal knowledge through building and testing theory within a disciplinary field. Mode 2 knowledge is generated in the context of application, is transdisciplinary, it's reflexive, and the quality is determined by how the research approach is collaborative and produces consequential actions. So going back into the story of the energy recovery micro hydropower, we said, well, was there any evidence of mode 1 in there? And yes, there was. The problems that the engineers initially were addressing that were solved within their engineering research community context revolved around, for instance, characterizing the pump as turbine, which was actually a very significant piece in its own right. The knowledge was good engineering knowledge around the pump as turbine or drain water heat recovery. The knowledge was hierarchical. There were different levels of knowledge that were connected, a sense of the process capability, the process characterization, and the know-how. And that knowledge was owned by the engineering experts in the case of the energy recovery system. And the quality control was evidenced through the way in which they extracted many peer-reviewed publications and conference presentations. But there was also mode 2. There was knowledge that was generated in the contexts of application, and I've shown you 2 of those around water production and distribution. The knowledge was transdisciplinary. The different discipline groups in the project all got involved, and in different ways and times, as we'll see from Alex in a moment. The knowledge production was reflexive. We were engaging in understanding our own process and questioning and reflecting on the way in which what we were doing was fundamentally progressing the research objective of energy recovery, carbon reduction, and so on. And the research itself, the group was not within a single discipline. In fact, there were 2 universities, the different disciplines, different water authorities, and 60+ firms spanning 2 countries. And given mode 2, a diverse range of quality control was exercised. We were engaging with real life issues. We were collaborative, reflective, and generating workable outcomes and actionable knowledge. So as we begin to reflect on what it is we were doing, the first thing that occurred to us was that the challenge we thought we had at the beginning was okay, but we needed to deepen the sense of it to include how mode 2 knowledge production can enhance mode 1 knowledge production in a transdisciplinary context. And the emerging insights from that were that the 5 discipline groups enacted mode 1 and in terms of engaging with mode 2 and combining with the other disciplines, they were producing mode 2 knowledge in the context of application. They integrated that knowledge produced through hardware, as we've seen, prototypes and demonstration units, software for monitoring, and the interaction and integration of the different team members and practitioners. They engaged in collective decision-making, supported by open communication around and across the different boundaries. And COVID happened, so as well as having real, we also had virtual co-location, but throughout, a little bit of mutual respect and patience as we learned each other's languages so that we could share and communicate around the evolving ideas that were coming from this. In a rush of blood to the head, one of our team, Roberta, reimagined what we were doing metaphorically as a flower pot. And the flower pot actually was a wonderful metaphor for this, because it has a combination, it's an ecosystem. It has a combination of abiotic and biotic factors. And the abiotic factors, the non-living ones, were the pot itself, the soil, the sun, the water. And the pot was based on our previous project, HydroBPT. The pot, in a sense, the Dorishka project was the framework with all the usual things that one finds in a funded research project around work packages and so on. The soil was the environment that was supportive of what we were trying to do. And the water was the funding, and hidden from it is the sun, which is the Ireland Wales programme. The biotic, or the living part of it, are the various researchers. And each of these researchers had a T profile, where they had deep discipline knowledge, but an ability to interact with each other. The stems and the flowers were the different activities that they were engaged in, and the bees were the external members of our network who came and challenged, who moved ideas, helped us to move ideas from one theme or stream to the others. So said differently, managing the TDR requires a climate which enables collaboration, interdisciplinary integration, interaction with practitioners, and the formation of non-academic partnerships. That interaction needs to be frequent, data-driven, reflectful, and respectful in an atmosphere of collaboration and trust. And the timing needs to be driven not just by the Gantt chart of the project, but also by the curiosity around emergent opportunities that come up from the project itself. And the publications as part of this become part of our way to help generate awareness and debate around these issues. And fortunately, the continuing involvement of the collaborators will help to continue the practical knowledge after the project finishes, and for the researchers help us to advance the theoretical knowledge that's latent within the whole project. So that's as much as I wanted to say for this part. And Isabel, you're asking for questions from participants into the chat, and we'll address those after Alex has finished his piece.
Yeah, and there are no questions in the chat yet. We could go back quickly to the first poll we launched actually, and the
Okay,
results.
I see a question coming in. So maybe I'm watching our time and wondering if we move ahead to Alex.
Okay.
And because that give Alex time to demonstrate the visualization of these interactions that I've mentioned now in a specific case.
Okay, so I should be sharing my screen now, but yeah. So I'm Alex Rigby from Bangor University, and I've been helping develop a visualization tool for visualizing interaction within the Dorishka project. So I'm just going to go through the process of preparing the data for the visualization, and then also give a demonstration of the tool. So the first step to getting from a Excel matrix to an interactive web application was to discuss. So we got together and we discussed what data we had, and we discussed what we were looking to gain by visualizing the data. So we had the data in that matrix that Paul showed earlier, even though it wasn't quite right for computer visualization yet. And we were looking to develop a system where we could highlight internal and external collaboration and communication within the project in a more intuitive way than scrolling through an Excel matrix. So we then had to make some changes to the data set. So even though there's a lot of data, it wasn't all in the correct format, and we need to make sure that it was machine readable by removing some ambiguities and standardizing the input. So an example I've got here is publication and journal paper. So to me or you, we could see that those two fall under the same category, but read into a computer, those two would come up as different categories. So basically that sort of ambiguity needed to be standardized. And then once the data was all formatted correctly, we could start implementing different features on the tool. And then we need to come back and review to make sure that the changes were all done correctly, and also there wasn't any more changes to the data set that we needed to make, and also to look at the different features we'd implemented on the tool and make sure that they were meeting the requirements of the end users. But it didn't stop there. So the discuss, implement, and review cycle was iterated through constantly throughout the length of the project. And this made sure there was a constant, steady stream of progress in the development phase. And for this steady stream of progress, we needed to make sure that there was a good relationship between the visualization team and the dataset team, which allowed us to have an environment where we could discuss and trial and then sometimes reject different ideas, which all came together for to help us build a more useful end tool. So if I exit this here, okay, so what I'm sharing now is the default view of the tool that we developed. So it's a node link diagram where each node is a data point, and then the links are just communications. So if I describe a little bit better what's here, so the colored boxes each represent a work package, and the colors of those work packages are indicated in the legend on the left. Then within each work package are a number of circular nodes, and these circular nodes each represent an activity. And then this cloud on the outside, each one of these square nodes represents an external stakeholder. And you can see that the circular nodes, so the activity nodes and the stakeholder nodes, are different sizes, and their sizes represent their number of connections or their number of collaborations. So the larger the node, the more collaboration that node has had. So it's all well and good just looking at the IDs, but if you want to know the actual names of the different graph elements, what you can do is hover over them, and we can see that this blue work package is the micro hydropower work package. We can see that activity 4 is the BGWS primary school webinars activity, and then we can look at the stakeholder as well. And for this demonstration, we've anonymized the data set, but we can see that this is stakeholder 172. And if you look at in the middle, there are a bunch of connections or orange lines between the work packages, and these represent the collaboration between activities between the work packages. So the thicker the line, the more collaboration there has been between those work packages. So work package 8, the smart specialization cluster, has collaborated a lot with work package 1, the micro hydropower work package. But then work package 1 has collaborated last with the climate change impacts and adaptation work package. So this gives a bit of an overview, but if we want to get a bit more information about individual items, what we can do is select them. So if I select work package 1, we can see it's highlighted and so are its connections on the diagram. And we can see a bit more information about that work package. So we can see work package 1 is the micro hydropower work package. We can see it's a technology platforms category. Then we can also see the SDGs that are addressed by the activities within that work package. We can see a list of the activities in the work package, and then a list of the linked stakeholders. So the stakeholders that have engaged with activities in that work package. And these stakeholders are listed by engagement level, and I'll explain that in a bit more detail in a minute. But if I show you now, we can also select an activity. So again, the activity is highlighted and so are its connections. And then we can see that this BGWS primary school webinars was in work package 1, that it was completed in December 2021. We can see that it was an event, and then a bit more information about it, like the description, the research question type. And this is all information that was put together by the researchers in that matrix that Paul showed you earlier. And also you've got a list of the linked activities and then a list of the stakeholders, but there's no stakeholders for this activity. So and then and I'll select a stakeholder now just to show you again that we can look at a bit more information about the stakeholder. So we can see that stakeholder 140 was a charity, and we can see a list of the activities per engagement level. So the engagement levels were adapted from a framework for transdisciplinary research from Utrecht University, and they identified 4 different levels of engagement, 1 being the lowest and 4 being the highest. So where a stakeholder is engaged with an activity, that engagement has been given a ranking of 1 to 4. And that's what we're seeing here. So to get a bit more of an overview of all the stakeholders' engagement level, what we can do is click this engagement button at the top, and it gives each stakeholder node a engagement ranking. So a color ranging from more red to more yellow. So the redder the color, the higher the engagement ranking, and the lower the color, or the more yellow the color, the lower the engagement ranking. So the way this engagement ranking is calculated is a linear mapping of the sum of the total number of collaborations or engagements per engagement level multiplied by that engagement level. So we can see that stakeholder 140 has had quite a lot of has engaged with lots of activities at a high level, and that's why it's got a high engagement ranking. But then if I select one which is more yellow, we can see that stakeholder 26 has engaged with one activity at an engagement level of 2, so it's got an engagement ranking of 2. So because the engagement can be different for the stakeholder can engage at different levels to different activities, we can't really see that level of detail in this view. So what we can do is select this network view. And what we're seeing here is the immediate network of the selected graph elements. So all the activities that stakeholder 140 engaged with. So you can see here that the connection style has changed, and that's because the engagement level is a directional relationship. So if I look in the legend in the left, you can see the connections legend. And if I hover over engagement level 2, it's where the external stakeholders provided information to the activity. So here we can see this charity has provided information to activity 90, so the launch of the Penryn demonstration site online. And the same stakeholder has provided information to the drain water heat recovery feasibility studies. And then if we look at engagement level 3, which is share, if I hover over that again, it says the flow of information is to and from the external stakeholder, so it's both directions. So we can see that the flow of information has been in both directions, from stakeholder 140 to the kickoff meeting, for example. And then finally, the last level of engagement we've got with this stakeholder is engagement level 4, which is where the external stakeholder works as an equal designer and contributor to the activity. So we can see that this charity has worked with the Tir Mawr Wybrant micro hydropower installation and helped that activity develop as an equal partner to their academic researchers. So just to demonstrate as well, if we want to then look at the network of the Tir Mawr micro hydropower installation, we can select it and then view the network of this particular activity, so we can see all the stakeholders that were involved in this activity, and then also all the different internal activities that collaborated with the Tir Mawr Wybrant micro hydropower installation. Okay, so if I deselect that element, so if I show a couple of secondary visualizations, so we've got a Gantt chart, which I'm sure you've all seen before, but it just gives a sort of time series view of how long the different activities took. So if I want to see a bit more information about the activity again, I can select it on the Gantt chart, and it'll highlight it in the graph at the top, and it'll also open up the information again about that activity. And then another secondary visualization is this analytics panel. So this drop-down menu, the options in this drop-down menu are all dataset fields from that matrix that Paul showed earlier. So if I select discipline, for example, this bottom chart is showing the total number of activities per discipline over the entire project period. So we can see that there are about 34 engineering projects and about activities, and about 15 activities under the discipline of environmental sciences. And then the top chart shows the total number of activities per month per discipline. So if I select one of the legend items at the top, I can select engineering, we can see that there was more activities under the discipline of engineering at the start of the project than towards the end of the project. If I select environmental sciences, we can see that there is more environmental sciences activities towards the end of the project. So there are a few different matrix categories we can choose here, or matrix fields. So we can look at the activity category and research question type to view the data in that way. So far, all I've shown you is how to look at the entire project as a whole as it is now, but we can filter the data to get subsets of the activities and stakeholders. So the first way of doing that is by progress report period. So if I select progress report period 1, we can see what we've done is filtered all the data down to all the activities and stakeholders that were present during the first progress report period, so the first 6 months. And then we can view the evolution of the project by scrolling through different progress report periods, and we can see how different activities and stakeholders are added and different work packages arise as we scroll through time. And then if I reset that, yeah, and because it's a force directed node link diagram, sometimes when new nodes are added, they can overlap, but you can just select them and move them around if to improve the view. And yeah, and the second filter is the stories filter. So Paul mentioned earlier the hydropower energy recovery story. So if I select that, this gives us a subset of all the activities and stakeholders that were involved in the hydropower energy recovery story. And again, what we can do is select progress report period, and we can scroll through the progress report periods and view the evolution of the project through time. So if I select the connection types as well, we can look at the connections in a bit more detail to see the individual collaboration between different activities in the hydropower energy recovery story. So yeah, and finally, if these stories here are predefined, but if a user wants to create their own story, create their own filter, what they can do is click this custom stories button, and then in here we have a list of different matrix or dataset fields, and you can choose to say filter the data by name or filter it by work package or activity category and create your own story. So if I go back to the slideshow now. So quickly, just how does the tool help? So the tool enables a more in-depth exploration of the project data. And in our case, it's sort of in retrospect looking back at the project because the tool was developed in the later stages of the project. But the idea is a system like this or a tool like this can be used to plan future projects and prepare proposals and explore what-if scenarios. And if a tool like this was implemented from the start of the project, it would encourage a more data-driven approach to recording activities as they're taking place and making sure that the formatting of the recording of activities is correct as well. And I touched on a little bit there that you could create your own custom filter. So what you can do is select your own name, and you can view how you fit into the project landscape and see how your interactions and collaborations have led to different outputs. And then finally, it creates a sort of visual water cooler point, which allows discussions between different disciplines. Okay, so I think I'm handing back to you, Isabel, for a poll.
Thank you, Alex. We have another poll prepared for you, which I'm going to load now. Okay, you should be able to see it. So question 1 is, have you used visualization to manage your project before? And the second question is, would you find a tool like this useful in your projects? Okay, I can see people answering. I'll give you a couple more minutes. Okay, 70% have participated. Okay, I think I'll end it because, okay, there's still people answering. Okay, and I'll finish the poll now and share the results. So most of you have answered that they have rarely used such a visualization tool, 45%, 36% never, and about 20% sometimes. And would you find this useful? 40% definitely, 36% probably, and some possibly. Okay.
Great, thank you, Isabel, and thank you, Alex, for a wonderful demonstration of this work. I see, Isabel, that we have some questions that have been coming through in the chat.
We have actually, we got, my questions disappear. Let me check. I will go to the chat again. There we are. So we had 2 questions for Alex, which have actually already been answered. So, and then we have also questions for you, Paul.
Yeah.
I will start with the first one. So, Paul, or you can also ask the questions yourself and put on your mics if you want. So the first question was by
I think
Gemma.
Darren Wallace had a question, and I see your question, Darren. You please feel free to, I'm watching our time, feel free to ask it directly, or I can just address it from your written script.
Sure, thanks. I had a question for you, Paul, and another one for the team after seeing the visualization. But the question I'd asked you, Paul, was were there any specific methods, either academic methods or facilitation methods or techniques that you used to enable transdisciplinarity and to foster a collaborative mindset?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And the answer is yes, very much from a facilitation point of view. I do a lot of work and writing with David Coughlin in the area of action learning. So not surprisingly, that informed our approach. One of the things that we did is that our project meetings are both in Ireland, in Trinity and in Bangor. And then when we all met together, that those meetings were not project management meetings where we were worried about the Gantt chart and deliverables and spent 2 days looking at it. Yes, we did worry about those things, but we spent most of the time treating those meetings as research workshops where everybody contributed, everybody questioned, and everybody came to understand what the other was doing. And that then helped very much when we began to construct the matrix. People already were familiar, not just with articulating their own work, but connecting it with the tasks and the works being engaged in by the others. So I'd say, Darren, that was probably the main way we went about it.
Great, thanks. I won't ask my other question. I don't want to hog things, but we have time.
I think Gemma had a question before, came in just before Darren. I don't know if Gemma wants to.
Thanks very much. No, I sent Paul a side note just explaining what I meant by orchestration. But if you think of a conductor of an orchestra, kind of standing over and helping people see how they fit together when they may come at things that they're. So this is not saying that you're not addressing it through the presentation, but just wondering whether thinking about it from an orchestration perspective is helpful.
Yeah, it is very much, Gemma. Thank you. I guess thinking about it from that point of view, we were engaged in an opera rather than with many acts, rather than singing a single song. So the complexity of the opera was such that we definitely needed to orchestrate the engagement of the different people in there. But that was helped hugely by virtue of the fact that this, as a project, took the bright ideas, the mode 1 knowledge from the engineers and the environmental scientists, and took it out through the laboratory and into the field. And so, we had plenty of space to work in and work with. And we had different collaborators who came knowingly into this kind of a project. We were helped also in the orchestration by virtue of the fact that the Ireland Wales Fund, which funded Dúrishca, had previously funded an earlier project, HydroBPT, and some of the same researchers and some of the same organizations had worked with us in that HydroBPT. So we knew each other and knew each other to the point where we call it, from a Trinity point of view, we talk about our Welsh cousins. So orchestrating that was something that could be done in real time among people who understood and appreciated and respected what the others were doing.
Paul, could I answer Durin's second question?
Yes, indeed.
Durin's second question was, where's it? Was it disappeared? Was there anything that surprised us in the connections, the visualization surprises? So Durin, as I was the project manager, I thought that the visual or the connections weren't already anticipated, and everything, probably a lot of things emerged organically, although there was a work plan, but the work plan didn't go into the detail of who we're collaborating with and so on. It was much more loose than that. But there were some, looking back on it, there were some elements of the project that were much more isolated and less impactful as a result. And if I was go back to 2016 when this all started, well, then I might change how I started thinking about how to structure all this together, you know. Particularly, what was a key feature, and Paul mentioned, was that we had these 4 demonstration sites. So some of the activity was going to be in the field, in the lab and in the field, and people could really see it, and some not. And so then those that were not, that were more academic, were harder to relate to for practitioners, you know. So as a result of that, they didn't have as much impact, but we could have designed them in a different way. So yeah, it was useful for me to see.
Yeah. And maybe, Angus, I see there's a question waiting for Vlad, but just to take that idea of surprise, During many of the team members, a number of them were using their engagement in the Durishka project as the basis for their PhD work. And so of necessity, that needs to have a strong disciplinary focus. But they also, we all needed to come to realize and therefore be surprised by the links between the within discipline work, the links between that and other disciplines. And in developing what Alex has shown us a moment ago was about this mode of visualization. Part of what we've been saying among ourselves, and particularly to the earlier stage researchers in the team, is that their appreciation and their visualization of the interactions, which may have been surprising for them, could form a very valid and valuable part of their profiles as researchers as they move on to what will hopefully be very good, strong research careers from here. They can demonstrate and speak about with authority and with evidence how they've worked across disciplinary and practice boundaries. Vlad, I see your hand.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for presenting a very, very great showcase, I think, of interdisciplinary collaboration. One of the questions I had is basically, at least I feel that many, or when it comes to publications, journals somewhat disencourage interdisciplinary work. And the reason for this is that very often journals are discipline specific. So for example, as an OB scholar, we have specific OB journals, and for us, it's even difficult to publish in HRM journals, not to say like truly cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary. So my question is, I think you produced a very nice output in terms of tangible product. When it comes to publishing your research, how did you handle the challenges of publishing interdisciplinary research?
Okay. Thank you, Vlad. Panos, would that be a question you might, because we're working on a paper which Panos is leading on at the moment. And Panos, you might maybe begin the reply to Vlad.
Yes, I think there are two strands in the question. How did the rest of the group, or the main core of the group, publish interdisciplinary work? So I'll leave that probably to Paul to answer. But when it comes to presenting something like this particular project, this particular flavor, our plan is to write a paper that focuses on the development of the application, the development of the tool. And that is not so much of a technical kind of paper to describe what kind of libraries and what kind of platforms we use, but it's mostly has to do with how did we come up with a tool which is useful for domain experts. And this is something that quite often publications in the area of data visualization, they have this kind of flavor. It's the so-called use cases or application design. They have various different names that the community keeps on changing. But the idea there is because quite a lot of visualization people, computer science people, they have some very powerful tools in order to build tools like this, but they don't necessarily have the data. They don't necessarily have interesting use cases. They often work with domain experts. So whether it's cultural heritage, whether it's in these cases environmental work. So and that creates a very interesting dynamic because we, the computer science people, understand the data, but we don't understand necessarily the semantics of the data. Whereas people have an opinion about the semantics, but they don't necessarily have an opinion on how to do it exactly, machine readable, as Alex said at the beginning. So I think this is a dynamic that we want to portray in the work. Also, I think there are quite a lot of interesting lessons learned that have to do with how we, the engineers and the developers, worked with the domain experts. What's the language? We, unfortunately, as visualization researchers, have been in many projects that the appreciation of data was very limited, which is not the case here. There's a very deep understanding of what the data is, and maybe we discussed a little bit about the formats and things like that, but the data was already there. It was already captured from a certain point of view, and that was an interesting, if a little bit convenient case for us, but that meant we could actually develop the tool and work more on the relationships and all the interesting components that we could work. So yes, we will publish in a computer science journal that has a very strong interdisciplinary flavor, if that is the short answer to what you asked about this particular work.
And Vlad, separately we can chat about this, but the project, and Angus will know what our target was in terms of our promised level of publication, and we've way exceeded that. And one of the features of many of the publications across the different disciplines that has come out of the project is that there are multiple authors involved, and often from different or other disciplines in doing that. So we've engaged, we've been successful so far. I'm just seeing a question from Jake. Jake, I think you asked how we gathered the data, and maybe this might be an opportunity for Roberta to comment a little bit about how Aisha and yourself constructed the matrix.
So we started with sort of an example. So we put in certain records of the project, but then it was a team effort. So we can't claim all the work was done by the two of us. We sort of set it up, and we did that because we wanted to use the example that could explain well the rationale why we were going to ask them to take time to reflect on their work and put all this data into the matrix. And, when we explained that it was to show the collaboration, to show how there was more to their work than their publication or their participating in a webinar, because they had contributed to the transdisciplinary outputs of the project, then I have to say I have to say all of them, even past researchers, came on board and they wanted to contribute. So there are more than 100 records. I can't tell you how many columns, because a lot of them are for visualization. So as Alex was saying, it was iterative. So first we tested what was the content of the matrix in terms of, is it telling the story we want to tell? Then of course we had to go and refine the columns in the matrix when the visualization experts were telling us, yes, it's very good, but to tell the story in a visualization context, we need a different kind of language, not a description or a number. And so we had to do a few iterations, and it did take a lot of time, but I think it was worth. We were really happy with the outcome. And we came to realize that if this was done from the start, and at each report, at end of each reporting period, each researcher entered put the entries in the matrix, it would have not been such a long process to do, and it would have worked as checking against milestones and the deliverables as well. So helping the management of the activities as well. And there was just, I just wanted to say a very quick question about Diren's question at the very beginning about how we got about to create the transdisciplinary environment. And because Paul mentioned the within the researchers, and I want to say that the same has been used also with the external stakeholders. So we've never approached them in a way to say, oh, this is our solution, apply it. We always say, what's your problem? What can we do for you? And then worked with them, for them, and of course also suggesting things that have been developed in the lab, or ideas that we knew technologically, from technological point of view, we knew could work. And so that's the way. So the same approach has been used also with the external stakeholders, even with schools. And when we went to the schools, we always had an open mind to say, this is what we would like to do. How is it going to work for you and in your context? Oh yeah, there's another comment from Jack. Could be built into mini-meets or procedure. Yeah. So we were.
And Jake, I think that's picking up a little bit on, as Alex presented it, some of our sense of the possibility for this visualization approach, that it can help hugely with planning projects, planning the way in which resources will be deployed, planning the timing, or as Gemma puts it, the orchestration. So I think we're up against the clock. Angus, do you want to close us out? And I can share the screen on the announcement.
Yes, Paul. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. So we are just running over time, so we'll finish up. So thanks to everyone for attending, and thanks all the speakers, especially Paul and Alex, for presenting the majority of today. But thank you everyone in the transdisciplinary core team, Roberta and Panos and everyone in the background there, and Aisha and Isabel for helping us put it all together. Like I mentioned there a moment ago, we have a final event, which is on the 7th of March, celebrating the end of the Dual-Ishka project over an unusually long 6.5-year event. And there will be some great musical entertainment if you wish to come along to the business school on 7th of March for a short sort of morning. So it'll have a balance of the technical and some of the non-technical details you heard there today. So yeah, thank you very much. And you can find more on our website. There are various 3D tours of the demo sites, and we have videos and Twitter and so on. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Angus, and thanks everybody.
Thank you.